Hi, sweet ones. This is Grandma Kitty. Today I want to tell you about Stacy, a woman whose life was full of love until it was stolen in the most shocking way. What makes her story unforgettable is that even when the truth seemed buried, her sister never stopped fighting to bring it to light. Stacy Feldman was 44 years old, and for her family was the center of her world. She was the youngest of 3 sisters and had grown up dreaming of the day she would become a wife and a mother. By the time March of 2015 came, it looked like her dream had finally come true. She lived in a lovely home in Denver, Colorado. She was raising 2 young children, and she was married to a man named Robert Feldman. From the outside, her life seemed secure and happy, but on the morning of March 1st, 2015, everything changed. Only hours after Stacy learned the crushing truth of her husband's betrayal, she was found lifeless in her shower. At first glance, it looked like a terrible accident. For years, that is how it remained. But after 7 long years of questions and persistence, the truth emerged. Stacy's death was no accident at all. Her story is one of heartbreak, betrayal, and a fight for justice that refused to fade, because what followed was not just an investigation, but a battle led by a small group of women who would not rest until the truth came out. And before we start, would you do something for me? Go ahead and subscribe so you'll never miss a story. Think of it as Grandma saving you a little place right here. So every time I sit down to share, you'll be here with me. Stacy Feldman was the baby of her family, growing up in Muni, Indiana, with her 2 older sisters. Her sister, Susan Feldman, often said she had been special from the very beginning. The 3 girls were close, and Susan remembered that Stacy was their father's little girl, always full of light. Those who spent time with her described a young woman who radiated joy and warmth wherever she went. Susan later added that Stacy loved all things girly. She adored the color pink and always stood out as the life of the party. Beyond her bubbly personality, she had a deep love for people and her community, always looking for ways to give her time and energy to others. As Stacy entered her 30s, she watched as many of her friends settled down and built families of their own. She longed for the same life, but it felt further and further away with each passing year. Susan explained that for someone like Stacy, who had always dreamed of being a wife and a mother, it became harder to wait while others were moving on. That waiting ended when she was introduced to Robert Feldman, a man her friends and family called Bob. He was 14 years older than Stacy, confident and charming. According to a friend named Jan Goldenberg, Bob had a certain presence. He knew how to win people over, and eventually, he won Stacy's heart. In 2005, Stacy and Bob married in Montreal, Canada, at the elegant Ritz Hotel. For Stacy, it was everything she had wished for. She even wore a sparkling tiara, feeling like her happily ever after had finally begun. Soon after, they made a home in the Denver suburbs. The couple welcomed a daughter and later a son. From the outside, the Feldmans looked like the picture of success and happiness. Stacy put her heart into being a mother and into her community. She became the president of the parent-teacher organization at Southmore Elementary, where her children went to school. She also worked at a nonprofit group called Partners Seeking a Cure, which supported research into liver disease. But behind closed doors, the perfect picture was beginning to crack. Bob struggled to succeed in his work as a salesman. His inability to provide put stress on the family. Stacy, who had always hoped to stay home with her children, had to take on work to help keep things afloat. There was also Bob's need for control. Every major asset, from the house to the credit cards, was under his name only. This left Stacy financially vulnerable, and he would remind her of that power. He threatened that if she ever tried to leave, he would take the children and leave her with nothing. To those closest to her, the pattern of emotional and financial control was becoming clear. And then there was the betrayal. Bob was unfaithful throughout their marriage. For years, he kept profiles on dating apps and websites, pretending to be someone else. He used names like Robert Wolf or Mike Reed, changing his age and background depending on the situation. Sometimes he presented himself as a divorced conservative Jew in his 50s, and other times as a Reformed Jew in his 40s. Even with all of this, Stacy fought to keep the marriage together. She believed in the family they had built and did not want to give up. But by the beginning of 2015, the strain was obvious. Her family and friends knew she was struggling, but none of them could have imagined how dangerous Bob's lies would turn out to be. In the month of February in the year 2015, Robert Feldman was using the dating app called Tinder under a false name, introducing himself as Robert Wolf. It was there that he connected with a woman named Susan McBride, who had no idea she was about to step into the middle of a story that would grow into a murder case lasting 7 long years. Right from the beginning, Robert lied. He told Susan that he was divorced and that his former wife had abandoned their children. Wanting to give him a chance, Susan agreed to meet him in person. Their first date went smoothly, at least on the surface. Susan later testified that their time together felt easy and natural. She said it was just a very easy, friendly conversation. There was no lull in the conversation that I can recall. After I left there, I remember thinking, this is a nice guy. But when Susan tried to look him up online, using the names he had given her, she found nothing. That lack of information unsettled her. Something felt wrong. She tried to cut off contact, but Robert insisted she give him another chance. He spun another lie, saying he had once been the victim of a stalker, and that was a reason for using fake names. He also swore he really was separated from his wife. Against her better judgment, Susan decided to believe him. On the night of February the 26th, just 4 days before Stacy Feldman's death, Robert went to Susan's home for dinner. They shared a long talk, and then they slept together. But his behavior after that night immediately raised red flags. He canceled their plans for the weekend and began to pull back. Susan's instincts told her that something was off, and this time she pushed harder for the truth. She searched the internet again, this time digging deeper. Eventually, she came across a name on the Southmore Elementary School website. It was Stacy Feldman, listed as the president of the parent-teacher organization. That was the moment Susan realized that Robert had been lying about everything. He was not divorced at all. He was married, living a double life, with 2 young children at home. Susan now faced a choice. She could walk away quietly, or she could step forward and tell Stacy the truth. She decided that honesty was the only right option, even though it meant admitting her own involvement. On the morning of March the 1st, at about 6:20, Susan wrote an email to Stacy. In the email, she introduced herself by name and explained that she had met Robert on Tinder. She said he had told her he was separated and that she felt Stacy deserved to know the truth. Susan's words were not cruel. They were direct but compassionate. She later explained, "My name is Susan McBride. You don't know me, but I met your husband on a dating site called Tinder. He told me you had been separated for quite some time. If you are not separated, you should know that he is cheating on you." She even attached copies of the text messages Robert had sent her, proof of his lies. That morning, just before 9 o'clock, Stacy called Susan. Even though she had just learned that her husband had betrayed her, Stacy remained calm. Their conversation lasted around 5 minutes. Susan later remembered Stacy as being sweet and kind, not angry. During that call, Stacy admitted that this was not the first time Robert had cheated on her. But then she said something that would become a cornerstone in the murder case. Stacy told Susan, "I am done with him." Those 4 words, spoken only hours before she died, gave prosecutors the motive they needed. Around 10 o'clock that same morning, Stacy sent what would turn out to be her last text message. In it, she mentioned she was supposed to pick up her children from religious school at noon and take them to a Purim carnival. She never got the chance. That Sunday morning of March, the first started like any other for the Feldman family. At 8:30, Robert dropped the two children off at Temple Sinai for their classes. The plan was for Stacy to collect them at noon and take them to the carnival held by the synagogue. But noon came and went, and Stacy never arrived. The school staff called her cell phone. She did not answer. They then called Robert to ask if someone else was supposed to pick the children up. His response was unusual. He told them he would come shortly to get them, but when 12:45 came and he still had not arrived, they called him again. This time, his story changed. Now, he said he thought a family friend was supposed to pick the children up. Finally, at 1:05 in the afternoon, Robert arrived at the synagogue. One of the teachers noticed that he seemed different. His hair and clothes looked messy, and he acted curt, unlike his usual demeanor. Instead of going home to their mother, Robert took the children to the Purim Carnival and later to a bicycle shop. It was not until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that Robert finally brought the children home. His daughter would later testify that she had been excited to show her mother the prizes she had won. But when they walked in, Robert told her to go put her coat downstairs, steering her away from the upstairs bedroom where Stacy was. What happened next was preserved in a 911 call. Robert could be heard shouting, "Oh my God, I need help. Please help me. Please, my wife is not breathing." He told the operator he had found Stacy unconscious in the shower with the water running, and that he had pulled her out and was doing CPR until help arrived. But there were problems with his story. First responders saw immediately that the bathroom floor was completely dry, even though Robert claimed to have pulled her from a running shower. One firefighter later said that in all their experience, they had never seen a body removed from water without water spilling everywhere. There were more red flags. On the 911 recording, there were no sounds of CPR being performed. No heavy breaths, no chest compressions. Instead, the audio picked up the sound of a toilet flushing and objects being knocked over, as if Robert was staging the scene rather than saving his wife. At 3:40 that afternoon, paramedics arrived. Despite their efforts, Stacy could not be revived. She was pronounced dead inside the home. Detective Randy Dennison was one of the first investigators to step into the house. From the very beginning, he felt Robert's behavior was troubling. In his affidavit, he wrote that Robert looked as if he was in shock, walking around confused, but that it seemed fake, like an act. At one point, he wrote, "Robert walked away as if he was confused, giving the impression he was overacting in an effort to avoid speaking with me." The firefighters who had responded also noticed the same thing. They said Robert was overly dramatic and unhelpful, the opposite of what most husbands would be in such a moment. Still, in those first hours, there was no physical evidence of foul play. To many eyes, it looked like a possible accident in a bathroom. But the truth would soon come out, and the autopsy would reveal something very different. On March the 2nd in the year 2015, just one day after Stacy Feldman's death, Dr. Kelly Kobolansky carried out the autopsy. This was important for several reasons. For one, Dr. Kobolansky was still relatively new to the job, and this was one of her very first times performing an autopsy on her own. And second, the findings from that examination would later become central to the case. The autopsy revealed that Stacy's body carried more than 80 different injuries. These included bruises across several areas, internal bleeding under the skin known as hemorrhages, small abrasions, and even a chipped tooth. She also had particular bleeding inside her eyes, tiny burst blood vessels, which are often signs that someone has been suffocated or strangled. Yet even with so many injuries, Dr. Kobolansky was not able to say for certain how Stacy had died. The official cause and manner of death were both listed as undetermined. That ruling left the case in a cloud of uncertainty for years, nearly letting a killer walk away free. During this early investigation, Robert's own behavior raised suspicions. When police questioned him about what he had done on the morning Stacy died, his stories did not line up. At first, he claimed that he had followed his usual routine, leaving for work, going to the gym, and then meeting a coworker at a bus depot in Broadstone, where part of his job involved checking advertisements on buses. But when detectives pressed him further, his story shifted. In another version, Robert said that on the morning of his wife's death, Stacy had told him she was tired and had gone back to sleep. He said he left home with their 2 children at about 8:30 in the morning and drove them to Temple Sinai for religious school. He told investigators that he returned around noon, called out to Stacy but got no response, changed his clothes in the laundry room, spent time cleaning the garage because a shelf had supposedly fallen, and then went out to a park to exercise. Robert also made claims about Stacy's health that were not true. He told detectives that she had eaten edible products containing a drug, a plant that begins with the letter M and ends with the letter A, on the night before she died. But the toxicology report from the autopsy showed absolutely no trace of that substance in her system. He also claimed that Stacy had been feeling unwell for months and had even missed several days of work, but records and witnesses showed that was false as well. Another troubling detail came to light in the form of money. Within months of Stacy's death, Robert collected on a large life insurance policy that had been purchased 5 years earlier. He received $750,000. What raised even more eyebrows was the fact that Stacy's life had been insured, but Robert's had not. There was no equal policy in place for him. Investigators later pointed to this imbalance as evidence that he had planned everything in advance. As the investigation deepened, detectives also uncovered Robert's long-standing habit of infidelity. They found that he had profiles on multiple dating apps and websites, often using false names and providing conflicting details about himself. One particularly disturbing incident involved a woman named Stephanie Shoemaker. She met Robert at a grief support group where he lied by telling her that Stacy had died from cancer. During what she thought was a date, Robert brought her to his home and sexually assaulted her. Even with all these red flags, the case was stuck. Because the autopsy had listed Stacy's death as undetermined, prosecutors did not have enough evidence to charge Robert with murder. It seemed, for the moment, that the case was at a standstill. But Stacy's family would not give up, especially her sister, Susan Ullman. From the very beginning, Susan had been convinced that Robert killed her sister. Her instinct was so strong that the moment her father called on that Sunday afternoon to tell her Stacy had died, her first thought was not accident, but murder. Susan later shared the story with the Intermountain Jewish News. She said she lived in the Boston area at the time. It was a Sunday, and she was getting her kids ready to go to a sporting event when her daughter answered the phone. "It is Grandpa," her daughter said. Susan told her to say she could not talk, but her daughter insisted, "No, you have to talk to him." Susan picked up, and on the line she heard her father's voice. He said, "Stacy is dead." At first, Susan could not even process the words. She asked what had happened, expecting to hear something like a car accident. Instead, her father said it was some kind of bathroom accident. Susan refused to believe it. She told the paper, "My immediate reaction was that her husband had killed her." As the weeks turned into months and the official investigation went nowhere, Susan took matters into her own hands. She was sure Robert was walking free after committing murder, and she was determined to stop that from happening. Her suspicion came from years of seeing how he treated her sister. She had watched him control Stacy financially, threaten to take the children away if she left, and constantly cheat on her. To Susan, he was a man who always looked for the easy way out. She even recalled how he would deliberately bring damaged luggage to airports, then claim the airlines had broken it, demanding brand new replacements. It was a small scam, but to Susan it revealed the dishonest streak at his core. Susan knew, though, that her suspicions alone could not convict him. She needed expert help and solid proof. That turning point came nearly 2 years after Stacy's death. In a conversation with a relative who was a psychologist, Susan explained the circumstances of Stacy's death and her marriage. The psychologist listened carefully and said that what she described sounded like an abusive relationship that had ended in murder. He suggested she reach out to the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, an organization that specializes in identifying hidden strangulation cases, situations where domestic violence homicides are disguised as accidents or suicides. Susan followed that advice. The Institute connected her with Detective Randy Dennison, the same investigator who had originally worked Stacy's case and who had always suspected something was off, but did not have the knowledge to prove it. Through that connection, Susan was introduced to Dr. Bill Smock, a police pathologist and a national expert in strangulation cases. Dr. Smock was no ordinary medical professional. He had been an emergency room physician, had completed a fellowship in forensics, and had worked on thousands of autopsies and crime scenes. His expertise was so respected that he had testified in high-profile cases, including the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd and the Kendi Howard case in Idaho, where he helped prove that a state trooper had strangled his wife and staged it as a suicide. Dr. Smock's record was unmatched in every strangulation case he had worked on. His evidence had led to a conviction. Meanwhile, another vital piece of the puzzle came from Susan McBride, the same woman who had exposed Robert's affair on the morning of Stacy's death. In June of the year 2015, about 3 months later, Susan McBride was on another disappointing online date. The experience reminded her of Robert, and she wondered what had happened to him and his marriage. She typed his name into a search engine, expecting to find divorce records. Instead, she came across Stacy's obituary. The date listed was March the 1st of the same year, the very day Susan had spoken to Stacy on the phone. Susan said the discovery made her physically ill. She knew immediately that Stacy was dead because of what Robert had done after that phone call. She went straight to the Denver Police Department and told Detective Dennison everything: the affair, the lies, the conversation she had with Stacy. For Stacy's sister, this was the break she had been waiting for. Finally, there was clear evidence of motive. Robert killed Stacy because she found out about his affair and told him she was finished with him. But motive alone was not enough. They still needed to prove how Stacy had died. That was where Dr. Smock came in. In the year 2017, nearly 3 years after the death, he agreed to review every piece of evidence. He studied the autopsy report, the toxicology results, and hundreds of photographs taken during the autopsy and at the crime scene. What he saw told a very different story than an accident. The more than 80 injuries on Stacy's body, taken together, showed the signs of a violent, drawn-out assault. Dr. Smock concluded that she had died from suffocation, strangulation, or a combination of the two. He explained that the bruises on her arms matched the shape of knees pressing down, as though someone had straddled her and pinned her arms while cutting off her air. The burst blood vessels in her eyes were textbook signs of strangulation. Defensive wounds on her hands showed she had fought back. Even the fabric marks imprinted into her skin showed that she had been clothed during the attack, proving Robert's story about her slipping in the shower was false. Dr. Smock also pointed to the staging of the crime scene. Stacy was found wearing a wristwatch, something no one wears in the shower. The bathroom floor was dry, even though Robert claimed to have pulled her from a running shower. Some bottles in the shower were knocked over, but others that should have fallen were untouched. And most telling of all, the shelf Robert said had fallen on her body left no bruising on her skin, which meant it fell after she was already dead. Dr. Smock painted a horrifying but clear picture. Stacy had been attacked in the bedroom, strangled and suffocated. Robert had then undressed her, moved her body, and placed it in the shower to make it look like an accident. He explained that a person can be knocked unconscious within 5 to 10 seconds of pressure being applied to the neck and breathing can stop within a minute to 2.5 minutes. When asked whether Stacy had suffered, he answered softly but firmly, "Yes, ma'am." He described her wounds as constellations of injuries that did not fit with a fall in the shower or with resuscitation attempts. They fit with what he called a vicious beatdown. His conclusion was simple. Stacy Feldman's death was a homicide. At last, prosecutors had the expert testimony and medical evidence they needed. Dr. Smock's work turned the case from an undetermined death into a prosecutable murder case. His report gave the Denver District Attorney's Office the foundation they needed to finally charge Robert Feldman with murder. On February the 16th in the year 2018, nearly 3 years after the death of Stacy Feldman, Robert Feldman was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Many believed this moment would be the beginning of the end, but instead it opened another long and frustrating chapter filled with delays and endless legal maneuvering. At first, Robert was held without bail, but after a preliminary hearing, he was granted release on a bond of $1 million and placed under strict house arrest. His defense team argued that the case against him was built on nothing more than circumstantial evidence. Before the trial could move forward, a series of delays followed. The global pandemic of the year 2019 forced repeated postponements, with important witnesses unable to travel and testify. During this time, Robert was supposed to remain confined at home, yet he repeatedly broke the rules, sneaking out for unauthorized bicycle rides all across Denver. He even posted the routes of these rides online, ignoring the fact that he was under house arrest. Another major battle unfolded over money. In the year 2019, the Supreme Court of Colorado ruled that Robert could use $550,000 of the $750,000 life insurance payout from Stacy's death to pay for his criminal defense lawyers. This decision outraged Stacy's family. Her sister Susan later said, "This man has taken 7 years from my life. 7 years of me being able to live. 7 years of being able to be a mother to my children." Finally, in the early months of the year 2022, almost 7 years after Stacy's death, Robert Feldman stood before a jury. The trial began in April of that year. Judge Edward Bronin presided over the 9-day proceedings, which drew significant public attention. The prosecution's strongest weapon was the testimony of Dr. Bill Smock. In court, he used a mannequin to physically show the jury how Robert attacked Stacy, straddling her, pressing his knees into her arms, and choking her until she died. Prosecutor Maggie Conboy told the jury, "Stacy Feldman cannot tell you what happened that day, but her body can, and what it shows is that she suffered through a long, drawn-out, and horrific beating." Susan McBride, the woman who had bravely warned Stacy about the affair, flew in from Italy to testify about her phone call with Stacy on the very morning of the murder. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the testimony of the Feldman's teenage daughter, now 16 years old. She said that on that morning, everything had seemed normal. "I remember walking downstairs and having breakfast with my family. There was talking. Nothing seemed unusual," she told the jury. The defense fought back by attacking Dr. Smock's credibility. Defense attorney Jeffrey Pagluka called him a hired gun and a narcissist. He argued that 3 other pathologists had still maintained that Stacy's death was undetermined. He told the jury, "We cannot accept gossip and rumor instead of truth. This is a tragedy, but it is not a homicide." Throughout the trial, Robert sat quietly. He showed little visible emotion. At times, he even laughed with his attorneys while testimony about his wife's brutal killing was being presented. After 9 days of testimony, the case was handed to the jury. They took less than 3 hours to reach a decision. The verdict was clear. Robert Feldman was guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom heard powerful statements from Stacy's family. Her mother, Dorothy Mallman, said directly to Robert, "If you really loved your children, you would not have killed their mother." This is all because you could not control yourself and because you refused to accept the divorce Stacy wanted. You are evil. Her sister Susan also spoke, saying, I have been fighting for this for 7 years because my sister deserves to rest in peace. This man has taken 7 years from my life, and he is not taking one more second. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, Robert simply replied, no. He offered no apology, no explanation, no responsibility. After his conviction, Robert immediately began filing appeals, trying to overturn the jury's decision. But in November of the year 2024, the Court of Appeals of Colorado issued a 51-page ruling that rejected all of his claims. The 3-judge panel unanimously upheld his conviction. Robert had argued that Dr. Smock's testimony had wrongly replaced the authority of the county coroner, but the court made it clear. A ruling of undetermined cause of death does not block prosecutors from presenting expert testimony. Robert was also ordered to pay $111,600 to cover therapy costs for his children. Out of Stacy's tragedy came a legacy of advocacy. A fund in her name was created to provide legal help to survivors of domestic violence. Her sister Susan became an outspoken advocate, working with the Alliance for Hope International to push for awareness and reform. The conviction of Robert Feldman was not won by prosecutors alone. It was the result of what came to be called the Sisterhood, a group of women who refused to let Stacy's killer go free. At the center was Susan Ullman, whose determination carried the case forward when official investigation stalled. Susan McBride's honesty in coming forward gave prosecutors the motive and timeline they desperately needed. And without the expertise of Dr. Smock, who could see through staged crime scenes and identify strangulation patterns, Robert might never have faced a courtroom at all. Stacy Feldman will never be remembered only as a victim. She will be remembered as a beloved mother, sister, and community leader whose death helped bring attention to the hidden dangers of domestic violence. In the end, love and persistence proved stronger than Robert's deception. A sister's devotion outlasted a husband's lies, and Stacy Feldman can finally rest in peace, knowing justice was served.